10:45 p.m., Friday, April 26, 2013, Norton Shores, Michigan. Inside a brightly lit Exxon gas station on a quiet stretch of road, a 25-year-old woman is restocking shelves, counting down the final minutes of her shift. The register sits full. Her purse and jacket are tucked safely behind the counter, right where she left them. Everything looks exactly the way it always does at this hour, but in the parking lot, just beyond the reach of those station lights, something is very wrong. A silver van idles in the shadows. The driver has been here before, many times before, and tonight, he is not here for gas. Jessica Heringa has less than 20 minutes left to live. April 26th started like any other Friday shift at the Exxon station. Jessica clocked in at 4:35 p.m. Her boyfriend stopped by around 7 to say hello. A friend came by a little later. The hours moved the way late-night convenience store hours always do. Slowly, steadily, with the comfortable monotony of a place you know so well it almost feels like home. Jessica knew every corner of that store. She knew the regulars, the rhythms, the quiet stretches between customers. She felt safe there. She had every reason to believe tonight would end the same way every other shift had ended. Close up shop, count the register, lock the front door, drive home to her 3-year-old son. But then, at approximately 9 p.m., something changed. Witnesses inside the store noticed a silver van pull into the lot. Nothing unusual about that. People stopped for gas at all hours, but then they watched Jessica walk outside, out to the pumps, and speak with the driver. She was smiling, relaxed. She even laughed at one point. From inside the store, the witnesses could not see the driver's face. The angle was wrong. Only Jessica could see him. And from everything they observed, she appeared to know him, or at least to feel completely comfortable with whoever was behind that wheel. The conversation looked ordinary, casual. The van drove away. 2 hours later, it came back. At approximately 10:55 p.m., the store manager was riding her motorcycle past the Exxon station when something snagged her attention. A silver Chrysler Town and Country minivan was pulling around to the back of the building. She slowed. Something felt wrong in a way she could not immediately name. Why would a customer drive around behind the store at this hour? The pumps were out front. Her first thought was theft. Someone loading stolen merchandise through a back door. She pulled closer to get a better look. In the darkness behind the station, she could make out a figure standing at the van's open rear hatch. The figure closed the door, then opened it again, adjusting something inside. That detail, the way he kept opening and closing that rear hatch, would haunt investigators for years. She caught a brief glimpse of the driver as the van pulled away. A man in a red or orange sweatshirt, wild wavy hair. She did not see Jessica. She did not hear any sound. No struggle, no screaming. Everything was oddly, disturbingly quiet. She drove on. At 11:10 p.m., a customer walked into the Exxon station and found it completely empty. Lights on, register full. Jessica's purse and jacket sitting right where she had left them behind the counter. "No, Jessica." He walked around the building, calling her name. Silence. He dialed 911. When police arrived, the scene told a terrible story in almost no time at all. The money in the register was untouched. Nothing had been stolen. But at the back of the building, right where the silver van had been parked, officers found a 2-inch pool of biological evidence on the concrete. Lying nearby was the battery cover from a handgun's laser sight. Investigators did not need long to reach their conclusion. Jessica Heringa had been abducted. Someone had either lured her outside or grabbed her during a brief, unguarded moment. Based on the evidence, detectives believe she had been struck with a weapon, knocked unconscious, and loaded into that van through the rear hatch. The entire abduction had taken less than 15 minutes. It had happened in near darkness and near silence, witnessed only by a store manager who did not yet understand what she had seen. Norton Shores police launched an immediate and intensive investigation. They worked with the store manager to create a composite sketch of the driver. They had the vehicle description: silver Chrysler Town and Country minivan. Canine units swept the surrounding area. They found nothing. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses was pulled, reviewed, analyzed. The van's path away from the scene was partially traced. The footage was grainy, inconclusive. The vehicle had simply disappeared into the night. And then came the number that made investigators' hearts sink. Michigan had approximately 15,000 silver Chrysler Town and Country vans registered statewide. 15,000, without a license plate. Without a more distinguishing feature, finding the right vehicle among 15,000 identical ones seemed almost impossible. Weeks passed. Then months. The investigation stalled. Jessica's family made public appeals. Her face was broadcast across the state. Tips came in and were chased and ran dry. And Jeffrey Willis went home. climbed out of his silver van, and walked through his front door. The case went cold. Number 2. Then came June 29th. More than a year after Jessica disappeared.
Where is your emergency?
We come up to this lady. She's laying in the road. I think she was hit by a car.
Okay.
Approximately 20 minutes from Norton Shores, 36-year-old Rebecca Bletch had been out for a jog. First responders initially believed she had been struck by a car, but investigators quickly determined the truth was far darker. Rebecca had been shot 3 times in the back of the head with a .22 caliber handgun. She had defensive marks on her wrists, hands, back, and legs. She had fought hard with everything she had. 3 .22 caliber shell casings were found scattered near her body. Rebecca died shortly after being found, never regaining consciousness. She had been ambushed, executed, and she had fought until the very last second. Detectives had no suspects, no witnesses, no clear motive. The attack appeared random, a disturbed individual targeting women who ran alone. Like Jessica's disappearance, Rebecca's murder went cold, and at this point, no one connected the 2 cases. No one yet understood that the same man was responsible for both. No one yet understood that he was not done. April 2016. Nearly 3 years after Jessica Heringa vanished from the back of that gas station, a 16-year-old girl was walking home from a party when she got turned around in an unfamiliar neighborhood. Lost, with no phone, she was trying to find her way in the dark when a silver van pulled up beside her. The driver, a middle-aged man, asked if she needed a ride. She declined, but she asked if she could borrow his phone to call for help. Something about the situation felt wrong. She could not have told you exactly what, but something in her gut was sending a signal she could not fully ignore. Still, she was young, she was lost, and she had no other options she could see. She climbed into the passenger seat. The moment her door closed, he hit the accelerator. The van lurched forward, speeding down the dark street. The driver reached under his seat. He pulled out a handgun. What he did next should have ended her life. But this young woman was not going to go quietly. She grabbed the door handle. She threw it open, and she hurled herself from the moving vehicle into the dark pavement rushing beneath her. She hit hard. She rolled. She got to her feet. She ran, full sprint, to the nearest house she could see, and pounded on that door with everything she had left. The silver van sped away into the night. But this time, police had surveillance footage from the area, clear enough to identify the vehicle, clear enough to identify the driver. The silver van was a Chrysler Town and Country. The driver was Jeffrey Willis. Search warrants were issued for Willis's home and vehicle on May 17, 2016. And what investigators found inside that van stopped them cold. This was not the vehicle of an ordinary man. Multiple syringes filled with what appeared to be liquid sedatives, handcuffs, wire restraints, a silencing device, rope, prescription medication, and most damning of all, a .22 caliber handgun equipped with a laser sight. That handgun was missing its battery cover. Ballistics testing was completed. The results were definitive. The bullets that killed Rebecca Bletch 2 years earlier had come from this exact gun. The shell casings matched perfectly. But investigators were not done. Because that battery cover, the one missing from Willis's laser sight, matched precisely the small piece of plastic found at the Exxon station the night Jessica Heringa disappeared, lying in the pool of biological evidence beside the back door. One small piece of plastic, 2 crimes, 1 killer. If you thought the evidence inside the van was damning, what came next was something else entirely. Willis's home computer opened a window into a mind, consumed completely by violence and predation. Detectives found illicit images involving minors, videos of women in captivity, detailed guides on conducting abductions, violent crime footage, some staged, some horrifyingly real. On an external hard drive, investigators discovered a folder labeled simply VIX. Inside that folder were 2 subfolders, RSB and JL Hay, Rebecca Sue Bletch, Jessica Lynn Heringa. Each folder contained photographs of the victims, newspaper clippings about their cases, and maps of the areas where they had last been seen. Willis had been keeping trophies, documenting his crimes with the cold, methodical precision of someone who took genuine pride in what he had done. Someone who wanted to remember. Someone who wanted to relive it. And then there were his computer passwords. One code, used consistently throughout his accounts. J4L27H13, Jessica's initials, and April 27, 2013, the day after she vanished, the day he considered her dead. Investigators dug into every layer of Jeffrey Willis's connection to Jessica Heringa. Phone records were pulled. Surveillance footage from the weeks before the abduction was reviewed. Cell tower data was analyzed. What emerged was a portrait of obsession that had been building for weeks before that Friday night. Willis had visited Jessica's gas station 15 times in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. 15 documented trips to a station where he had no apparent reason to be irregular. No evident connection to the neighborhood. No obvious need for that particular stop over every other option available to him. He'd been watching her, studying her schedule, learning the rhythms of her shift, the way a predator learns the patterns of its territory. And the night before Jessica vanished, witnesses recalled something that at the time had seemed merely odd. A man had come into the gas station and made a comment to Jessica, something about how customers were looking out for her, keeping an eye on things. The remark had been strange, slightly off. Jessica had noticed it but had no way of understanding what it meant. That man was Jeffrey Willis. He had been there the night before, watching, and he had come back. Cell tower data placed Willis near the Exxon station in the hours before Jessica was taken. He claimed he had been home that night. The data told a different story, placing him near his grandfather's property, approximately 7 minutes from the gas station. That property would become central to everything that followed. In May 2016, as evidence against Willis mounted into something nearly impossible to dispute, investigators brought in his cousin, Kevin Bloom, for questioning. Bloom was a corrections officer with the Michigan Department of Corrections. He initially denied any knowledge of the crimes. He sat across from detectives and said he knew nothing. Then he cracked. Bloom told investigators that on April 27, 2013, the morning after Jessica disappeared, Willis had called him. Willis said he had a woman and they were having a party. When Bloom arrived at Willis's grandfather's property, he found Jessica Heringa on the floor, unclothed, a head wound visible. She was unconscious but still alive. Willis told him what had happened. He had knocked her out at the gas station, loaded her into the van through the rear hatch, and brought her there. Bloom claimed Willis then assaulted Jessica in the worst possible way, then killed her. The two of them wrapped her body and buried her somewhere on the property. Bloom's account shifted. He confessed, then recanted, then confessed again. At one point he claimed he had fabricated everything, but there was a problem with that claim, a significant one. Bloom knew specific details about both Jessica's disappearance and Rebecca's murder that had never been released to the public. Details that only someone with direct, first-hand knowledge could have possessed. No news broadcast had mentioned them. No press conference had revealed them. You cannot know what was never told unless you were there. Eventually, Kevin Bloom pleaded no contest to being an accessory after the fact. He received time served plus 5 years of probation. He was fitted with a GPS monitor and released. He walked out of that courthouse, a free man. Jeffrey Willis prepared for trial. Willis's first trial, for the murder of Rebecca Bletch, began in May 2017. The evidence presented to that jury was overwhelming. The murder weapon, recovered from the van he drove, his DNA, his documented history of targeting women in isolated situations. Prosecutors laid out the argument clearly. Willis had attempted to abduct Rebecca while she was out jogging, alone on a road in the early evening. When she fought back, when she refused to go quietly the way he needed her to, he shot her 3 times in the back of the head and left her body in the road for someone else to find. The jury did not deliberate long. Guilty of first-degree murder, life in prison without the possibility of parole. The second trial, for the abduction and murder of Jessica Heringa, began in May 2018, and from the opening arguments, it was clear this one was going to be harder to watch. The defense stood before the jury and made an argument that was uncomfortable in its blunt simplicity. The state had no body, no witnesses to an actual killing, no physical proof that Jessica Heringa was dead. Perhaps, the defense suggested, the silver van seen behind the gas station that night had belonged to anyone. After all, 15,000 similar vehicles were registered in Michigan alone, and perhaps Jessica, who had faced some personal difficulties in her life, had walked away voluntarily, had chosen to leave. From the outside, stripped of context, it might have sounded almost plausible, but then the prosecution began building its case, and plausibility gave way to certainty, piece by piece. The jury heard about the 15 documented visits to Jessica's workplace, Willis's complete absence from his factory job the night she disappeared, and in the days that followed, when a man who had nothing to hide would simply have gone back to work. Cell tower data placing his phone near the scene of the abduction. The battery cover from his own laser sight, the same weapon found in his van 2 years later, recovered from the pool of Jessica's blood at the back of the store. The meticulously organized folders on his computer, the password that used her initials, and the date he had decided she was dead. Witnesses described the silver van, the timeline of that night, Willis's deeply unsettling behavior at the station in the days before Jessica vanished. And then there was the neighbor's testimony. An anonymous tip during the original investigation had led police to search property near a remote cabin in the woods. They had found nothing, but a neighbor later testified that 2 days after that search, They had seen Jeffrey Willis on that same property. He was digging with a shovel. 2 days after police searched, he was digging. The defense raised one final question about the crime scene itself. The store manager, who had witnessed the van behind the Exxon station that night, had noted that the rear exterior light was off, making the area very dark. But when police arrived after the 911 call, that light was on. The switch for it was inside the store. Who had turned it on? The prosecution offered a reasonable sequence. Jessica may have turned it on before being lured outside. Or Willis, who had visited that station 15 times and knew its layout as well as any regular customer, may have briefly entered through the front before moving around back. The exact order of events did not require resolution. What mattered was the totality of everything the jury had heard across days of testimony and evidence. After 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict. Count 1, open murder, guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and first-degree felony murder. Count 2, kidnapping, guilty. Jeffrey Willis received a second life sentence without the possibility of parole. 2 consecutive life terms. He would never see the outside of a prison cell again. At sentencing, Willis addressed the court. His voice was measured, calm, completely devoid of any detectable remorse. He spoke about constitutional principles, about what he characterized as failures of the justice system, about equal protection and due process. He spoke for several minutes, choosing his words carefully, presenting himself as a man wronged by an imperfect system. In all of that time, he never once mentioned Jessica Heringa by name. He never acknowledged Rebecca Bletch. He never expressed a single word of sympathy for the families whose lives he had obliterated. The prosecutor who had worked the case responded with barely contained fury. In almost 19 years of practice, he told the court, Jeffrey Willis was probably one of the most dangerous individuals he had ever encountered. He expressed his certainty that had Willis not been stopped, he would have continued killing in that community, that the number of victims would not have ended at 2. He told the court he would sleep well that night, knowing this man would never again have the opportunity to harm another person. Jeffrey Willis sits today in a Michigan maximum security prison, serving 2 consecutive life sentences without any possibility of parole. He is in his mid-50s. He will die in that cell. He will never again drive a silver van down a dark Michigan road. He will never again circle a parking lot, watching, waiting, choosing. But the damage he caused does not end with his imprisonment, because Jessica Heringa has never been found. Despite Kevin Bloom's account of helping to bury Jessica on Willis's grandfather's property, extensive searches of that land have yielded nothing. The woods near the cabin where Willis was seen digging with a shovel turned up empty. Jessica's family cannot give her a proper burial. They cannot visit a grave. They cannot leave flowers at a place that marks where she rests. They have a conviction, 2 convictions in fact, but they do not have Jessica. Her mother, speaking to reporters after the verdict was read, said the words that every person following the case already felt. We just want to bring her home. We want a place to visit, to talk to her, to leave flowers. Jeffrey Willis took so much from us. He could give us this one thing. He could tell us where she is. He will not. He has never revealed the location of Jessica's remains. He maintains his innocence to this day, sitting in a cell he will never leave, taking that final piece of information with him, like one last act of cruelty directed at a family that simply wants their daughter back. Jessica's son was 3 years old when his mother was taken from him. He is now a teenager. He has almost no memories of her, only stories told by people who loved her, only photographs of a woman he barely got to know. Jessica would be 37 years old today. She had plans. She had a little boy who needed her. She had a life that was cut brutally short in 15 minutes behind a gas station on a Friday night. What haunts investigators most, when they look back at everything that unfolded, is how close Jeffrey Willis came to never being caught at all. Think about that for a moment. If that 16-year-old girl had not trusted the instinct screaming at her from somewhere deep and primal, if she had frozen instead of acted, if she had not grabbed that door handle at exactly the right moment, if she had not run immediately to the nearest house and told someone what had just happened to her, Willis might still be out there, driving that silver van, circling parking lots, choosing his next victim. The connection between Jessica's disappearance and Rebecca's murder was not cracked open by a forensic breakthrough or a sophisticated piece of investigative technology. It was cracked open by a teenager who threw herself from a moving vehicle rather than become the next name in a labeled folder on a predator's hard drive. That young woman, whose identity has never been publicly revealed, is credited by law enforcement with breaking the entire case wide open. One detective put it plainly, that young woman is a hero. She did not know it at the time. She was just a scared kid trying to survive, but she stopped a serial killer. How many lives she saved that night, we will never know for certain. But the number is not 0. The number is significant. Willis's computer and hard drives revealed something that deeply unsettled investigators when they examined the full scope of what was recovered. This level of methodical organization, the labeled folders, the trophies, the carefully documented research into abduction techniques, the videos of captive women, this does not reflect someone who was beginning to develop dangerous behaviors. This reflects someone who had been doing this, or something very close to it, for a very long time. These are not the habits of someone learning. These are the habits of someone who had already practiced, already refined. Investigators reviewed cold cases across Michigan and neighboring states, looking for connections Willis might have to other disappearances, other deaths attributed to accidents or runaways, other women who simply vanished without satisfactory explanation. So far, Willis has been definitively linked only to Jessica and Rebecca, but the detectives who built the case against him say privately, and with a certainty that comes from experience, that a man does not become this organized overnight. Skills like the ones Willis demonstrated are built through repetition and time. How many victims might there be that no one will ever connect to his name? That question haunts the investigators who finally brought him down. It may never be answered. Norton Shores was changed by what happened to Jessica Heringa in ways that are still felt today. A community that had believed in its own safety, had trusted the ordinary appearance of its streets and its neighbors and its late-night gas stations, discovered that a predator had been living among them for years, operating in plain sight, driving a minivan, showing up at a convenience store, looking like everyone else. After Willis's arrest, women began coming forward with stories they had told themselves were nothing at the time, uncomfortable moments they had filed away and tried to forget, encounters with a silver van that seemed to circle back, a man who appeared too often, in too many different places, and stared a little too long before looking away. Individually, each account had seemed too small to report. Collectively, they painted the picture of a hunter who had been working his territory for years, testing limits, probing vulnerabilities, identifying the moments and the places where a woman might be alone and unprotected. Gas stations across the region changed their policies in the aftermath of what happened. Solo late-night shifts were eliminated where possible. Lighting was improved at back entrances and parking areas that had previously been left dark. Security cameras became standard rather than optional. Legislation was introduced in the Michigan State Legislature, often referred to informally as Jessica's Law, seeking to mandate minimum safety standards for businesses open and staffed after midnight. Jessica's family became advocates, showing up at community events, speaking to legislators, pushing for better investigation protocols, and more robust resources for missing persons cases for families waiting in that terrible suspended state where someone they love has simply disappeared. Jessica Heringa's family attended every single day of Jeffrey Willis's trial for her murder. They were present for every piece of testimony, every exhibit, every moment when the evidence laid out in that courtroom made the air in the room feel dense and hard to breathe. They listened to the details of what was found in Willis's van. They heard Bloom's account of that morning after. They listened to Willis stand at the podium and speak about abstract constitutional principles without a single acknowledgement that two human beings were the reason he was standing there. They watched him receive a life sentence and walked out of that courtroom knowing they had received justice in the legal sense of the word. But they still do not have Jessica. And, until they do, the case will never truly feel finished. Not for them. The investigation into Jeffrey Willis stands as a case study in something investigators and criminologists return to repeatedly when talking about predatory violence, how predators hide, not in shadows, not in abandoned warehouses, not in places that feel dangerous and clearly wrong. They hide in ordinary life, in parking lots and convenience store aisles, in the familiar, unremarkable rhythms of a community that has no reason to suspect anything. Willis worked maintenance jobs. He drove a minivan. He stopped for gas. He looked like everyone else on the road. That is precisely what made him so dangerous for so long and so difficult to identify. The warning signs existed. They always do, in retrospect. The uncomfortable encounters reported by women who had since tried to forget them. The unexplained repeat visits to a workplace where Willis had no legitimate reason to be a regular customer. Each incident, viewed in isolation, looked like nothing worth reporting. Viewed together, from the vantage point of everything investigators eventually knew, they told a story so clear and so devastating that it is hard to understand how no alarm was raised sooner. But no system existed at the time to effectively connect those dots, to aggregate the small, seemingly minor reports across jurisdictions and databases and community conversations, and recognize that they were all describing the same man. Willis moved through those gaps, and two women paid the price. Since his conviction, Michigan has worked to close some of those gaps. Information sharing between institutions and jurisdictions has improved. Police departments have developed better systems for tracking reported patterns of suspicious behavior tied to specific individuals or vehicles, so that a woman reporting a van that followed her can potentially be connected to another report filed across town about the same van. Communities across the state are more aware of what predatory behavior can look like before it escalates to violence. These changes came too late for Jessica Heringa. They came too late for Rebecca Bletch. But somewhere out there, they may already have interrupted a chain of events that the person walking away from the danger will never fully know they were part of. They may have saved lives that will never know they needed saving. Jeffrey Willis will spend every remaining day of his natural life in a Michigan maximum security prison. He will never give Jessica's family the answer they have asked for. Every day that he chooses silence is another day of cruelty extended toward a mother who cannot visit her daughter's grave, a son who grows older with only photographs instead of memories, a family that got justice and still cannot find peace. Somewhere in Michigan, in earth or water or the dark interior of the woods that have kept their secret for more than a decade, Jessica Heringa is still waiting to come home. The killer is behind bars, 2 consecutive life sentences. He will die in that cell. But for the people who loved her, one question still hangs unanswered in every room they enter and every morning they wake up without her. Where is Jessica? And until that question is answered, no verdict, no sentence, and no passage of time will feel like enough.